Hello and welcome to the Gauntlet podcast. I'm joined here by my co-host, Sherri Stewart.
Hello.
And we have with us this month returning Gauntleteer Tyler Lomanek.
Hello, y'all.
Awesome. So each month in our first segment, we look back at the games that we played on the Gauntlet. We talk about what we played off Gauntlet, but then each of us picks a game that we played and talks about it a little more in depth. So for this episode, we're looking back at March. Sherri, tell us how your gaming was in March.
Well, I had gone kind of light through early 2020, and so at some point I decided I was going to sign up for more games, and I inadvertently ended up filling my March up with a game every single night of the week. Good planning. But it was a fabulous month of gaming, so let me tell you what I was playing. Off Gauntlet, I played Hearts of Wooland with the Supernatural playbooks that are in playtest right now, and then also our usual 13th Age face-to-face. We lost a couple of face-to-face campaigns for a little while as we transitioned over to online. Some of those are just in a delay state, and some may not come back until later. And then on Gauntlet, I played #iHunt, which is a fate-based game. Also played 3 games by Jamila Najati. Have a Familiar Ring, The Unmasked, Once More Into the Void. I had talked about Have a Familiar Ring before and said I wanted to replay it. I did, and it was everything I hoped for. Also played more sessions of Brindlewood Bay, thank goodness. Such a good game. And still working through a lovely set of 7 episodes of Powered Beyond Doubt playtest, which I'm really enjoying. Played a month-long series of games of Apocalypse World Burned Over, set in the Star Wars setting, as part of the Star Wars Saturday initiative that Rich Rogers does. And that's the game that I'm going to talk about today. Ooh. So what is it? Well, it's Apocalypse Burned Over. And then Rich reskinned it for a Star Wars setting that he had on a planet called Dathomir that was, according to him, after the Night Sisters were killed and after the Empire had fallen. And well, clearly I'm not that lore savvy. I haven't watched the Clone Wars or any of the animated series, so there was a lot of things going on there. But it was great. Apocalypse World Burned Over itself is a Zine Quest hack of Apocalypse World that was by McGay and Vincent Baker. They did it as part of the Zine Quest and delivered it in September 2019, I believe. So it's a sort of small page count hack that's meant to be, I believe, a little bit more PG-13 or like YA novel kind of thing. Not really PG-13, except that there are no turn someone on moves kind of thing. No intimacy moves. And the game itself was 4 or 5 players on any given session. And the interesting thing about it is we didn't really collaborate on our characters at all before we got into there, other just to email what we were thinking. But the setting was known very well to all but me. And we pretty much just kind of sat down and went, okay? And what ended up working for me is I discovered that Burned Over has some really interesting tech, particularly the different flavors of Do Battle that go ways towards steering what great success looks like if you manage to roll it. It has a thing where you sort of accrue a set of choices that you get to make, and then you are contested by the GM. It's one where they make a set of rolls and then make some picks, and then you kind of set them and go head to head with those. So it's bringing a little bit of strategy, and it was fun because Rich grumbled about it a lot, and yet it didn't take that long really, and the results were really interesting. But it was fun to see also that it was a thing where when you really succeeded, you had a lot of advantages then in that time, and it could be turned to something that was significant to the story. And I think one of the things is because Star Wars is inherently at least a little heroic, and sometimes a lot heroic, that I discovered that I really prefer heroic PBTA games because success becomes more of something to celebrate, where a lot of times it just gets rolled into, yeah, sure, you got what you want, whatever kind of feel that success has, because everyone's leaning into the complications and the failures. And I'm like, I like success too, you guys. So this is one where it felt really good. It just really fit because every moment ended up being significant. All the roles were fun and changed the story and gave all of us something to react to, which is, of course, what you want from a game. The other thing that was really lovely is the players were so generous, and the GM found a way to fold all the outrageous character ideas into a cohesive story. I mean, cohesive enough that it felt almost like it was scripted. I mean, it wasn't at all, but I mean, if you read it or heard the synopsis afterwards, you'd be like, that was a pretty good story. So, because we had a vigilant who was obsessed with the wolves of the maelstrom. We had a clone operator, which is the sort of driving a vehicle around person who had set up a pretty good life for themselves after they sort of walked away from their empire responsibilities. We had a weaponized hazard trooper who had also, with the fall of the empire, been left at odds. And then there was a gear cutter and the occasional medic who showed up. And it ended up being a really good, cohesive story from start to finish. Well, we set it all up in the first thing, but from the sessions 2 through 4, just really on all cylinders, it was firing. Really good. If there was anything I was less certain about, I really wasn't sure I liked the harm move. It's one where after you've taken harm, you have to make another roll. It's called the harm roll that you take, and it's like more stuff happens. And it's like one of those things where you're like, okay, I've already made a roll and chosen harm or had harm happen to me. Now I have to make another harm to find out how that rolls out. And it's like, why don't just say harm and a complication? It's just like, oh, I'm not sure. It was just like one of those things that would be like, oh no, someone's really hurt. Maybe they're going to get hurt more. No, they're probably going to get hurt more. And it was like, okay. I mean, I kind of get it. It can add uncertainty to it, and that can make things more interesting and more desperate. It's not a completely planned amount of harm that you end up with.
The sprawl does that, and in the sprawl, it is very much used as a tool to, like when players take harm, that harm move can really take them out, and it's meant to be really kind of, I don't want to say oppressive, but to really put the screws to the player.
Yeah, and it may have been that Rich was being particularly generous, but it just felt like a kind of like, oh, a little downer that followed every time.
I was lucky enough I played Rich running Apocalypse World in that Star Wars universe, and it sounds like you had a Force user in, when you mentioned the first character, did you have a Force user there?
No, he wasn't. Well, actually, the Vigilant was not a Force user until later on in the sessions. They bought that. Burned over that role is called Brain Picker. And there's a couple other classes that can pick up some of those things that we treated as Force later. So like the gear cutter, I could have gotten some gear that would have let me do things. But he picked up something later on that allowed him.
The Force elements did get to come through and worked well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because what it was is that our Vigilant was obsessed with the wolves of the maelstrom. And the thing is that our weaponized hazard trooper, when asked if he was a wolf, said yes. And so we had the thing of we had to figure out what being a wolf of the maelstrom meant. And so, yes, all of that ended up being tied up into a mix between essentially the Force, but also that there was this idea of anyone who was AI controlled and was fighting that caused that sort of dissension and pull that created a sort of negative Force.
I think it's so neat he chose to run on Dathomir as well. I love Dathomir, and it's has a Force tradition that's so much different than other places. So I think that was really a fascinating choice.
It probably was. I, however, did not understand any of the significance of much of that thing. And it was very funny because all of the other players did, and they were adding all these little Easter eggs in about, the Star Wars stuff, and they were using the lingo, and they knew all the stuff. They were like, oh, is that one of these, a hydrospanner, blah, blah, blah. I mean, they knew what the hydrospanners were. I was the one who had to go, what's that again? But so they all knew it. It was very fun. They were very generous. Every time they would say those things, I would kind of be a little worried that it was going to be something I should understand, but it would turn out that it was just a little amusing detail that they wanted to color the things in more. They were very generous players, and I was much relieved. I know the original trilogy very well, and all the other things that came after that I watched and enjoyed. Well, maybe not the prequels, but well, never
And
mind.
you haven't watched all of the prequels.
No, actually, those were pretty dire. Yeah.
After I made you watch that middle one, you were like, I'm done with this.
Anything in that little sequence I couldn't handle, but the last one I was fine with. It was very much made for kids, and I'm not one anymore, but it had all of the things that would have delighted me back in the day. So, yeah. But here's the thing is I was sitting there with people who had watched all of the TV series, all of the animated series. They knew it backwards and forwards. They knew, like you, what Dathomir meant and how it was significant to the history of things. And they were loving it. And it was enjoyable because they were enjoying themselves and they weren't making me feel bad for not being as knowledgeable. And I had chosen a class that clearly didn't need history. So it was good. It was very good. I just had a lovely time. I have to say, Rich has that sort of Star Wars pacing and Star Wars feel down as a GM. The complications that he added and the payoffs and all of that felt very in genre to the Star Wars I knew, and clearly everyone else was loving it too. So
yeah,
he was
really
on
does.
beat.
Yeah.
He just does such a good job with that.
Those Star Wars cuts, he's just so sweet on them. They really play.
Well, it's amazing how he's taken so many different systems and does a quick reskin as quick as he can make it, and then just turns it into a story in the Star Wars universe, and everyone comes out happy with what they've gotten. I also like when a reskin doesn't work, that it pretty much just turns it into a Star Wars story. They're fine. Let as much of the system go as they need to and get back to business. So
I have one Apocalypse World question.
Yeah, sure.
Given my experience with playing Apocalypse World, running it just the once, playing it twice, once in regular Apocalypse World and once with Tyler in the one set on Tatooine. Apocalypse World feels to me there are a couple of things. One is that the players are really kind of oppositional in some ways, like there's a competitive note to it, and also that there's a certain amount of desperation to the existence. Do you feel that in Burned Over or in this reskin?
I think that there might have been a little bit of it, certainly that first session when we were setting up like where we were to start with and kind of bringing the group together, had that apocalypse feeling where everyone was sort of on the edge and didn't have a lot. But once we understand that the players were extremely generous, and particularly Sawyer is a force to be reckoned with, and when he declares you a friend of his characters, you have no choice. From that point forward, you are a friend of his characters. You know, your character is. And so, essentially, with a few declarations of kinship and interest in these Wolves of the Maelstrom that we all believed are vigilant, that they existed, we went forward in that way, and it felt pretty chummy, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
We certainly were all helping each other under the guise of doing jobs. We say doing jobs, but we were mostly running around to help each other. So that was, it was good. It was good fun.
Anything else you want to say about the game?
I think that one of the things is that PBTA is really written to fit to a genre. But the thing is that if you put a setting in it, it's going to, and run the PBTA, for the most part, that setting will still override anything, even if there is that kind of, the gritty wasteland. As long as your gritty wasteland is full of friends, you'll be a little bit better off. And I do like PBTA, all flavors of it, more when it's in a heroic game. I really enjoy. I think the complications, the failures, and the successes are all more dramatic because of that. Just because heroic has more exclamation points, and heroic has the thing of, if you fail, that means it's a complication for someone else, and that's interesting for them. They have something to do to assist you and to be part of your story.
Oh, interesting.
And I love that. I think that is a beautiful bit of chemistry. And again, the group and the GM were so generous and so intent on bringing everyone sticking to the story that it just felt great and effortless, even when I was the most clueless at the table. So it was a great time. Thank you, Rich. Thank you, players.
Tyler, tell us about your March.
Well, let's see here. I have played off Gauntlet. I played Starfinder. I played Worldwide Wrestling. I played Scion, the second edition of that. And I played Ars Magica.
Wow.
Ooh, classics.
Yes, on Gauntlet, I played Free from the Yoke. Now that we're in the end of days, I've been really busy at work, so I haven't had quite as much of a chance to be on Gauntlet, but at least I got to play that, which was magnificent, and it is the game I kind of want to discuss today. Free from the Yoke is by Jay Isles and Fyodor Kasatkin, I believe. I'm sure I am mangling his name, so I apologize now, but it is super, super cool. Some things about it, it is a legacy game, Jael's legacy game. It takes place in a kind of mythical, historic Russia, roughly 12 to 1400s, I would place it. You're playing as houses that are kind of baked into that time period, but it has so many nice supernatural elements that it certainly doesn't feel simulation. In our case, we've come up with some really interesting sort of non-Russian elements to it, which I think is really, really cool. The idea behind it is there was a great empire which had ruled over your land for centuries, if not decades, and we have managed to rebel and take them out of our country. The setup then begins with an arbiter, which is a GM role, which I like having a GM role in most games, and I think this one does a really nice job of giving them a solid purpose. They're not exactly your enemy, they're not exactly your friend. They were the force that helped throw out the Empire, and now you're dealing with having that force over the rest of the houses. There's several options that GM and players have influence on what they're like. We chose one which kind of has little fiefdoms for all the lieutenants that were there amongst that arbiter force, kind of watching over our houses. But there are several options, so it's every chance to play, every campaign you choose to play can be different. And again, they're not exactly enemies, they're not exactly friends. They are giving you a reason to go out there, an adventure, to go out there and cause trouble for you. They can be looking to expand. They can be trying to change the philosophies that are going on there. They can be relating back to the Empire, other places, and they're going to be giving you tasks as a house. And you can choose to follow them or not. You can choose to have your favor go up with the Arbiter or go really down away. And there's even a point where you can choose to rebel against the Arbiter. And I just find that whole set there really interesting. It adds so much variability to the game. Some of the things that I'm really enjoying about it, first off, I'm a historical nut, so I love the feel of that historic Russia. I think that there is so much to play in there. It is not as familiar to most people who are, say, Westrocentric. You know, you play your fantasy game, it's England, it's France, that sort of thing. Russia has a very different kind of mentality, and if you delve into that, that's really can be very interesting. We're kind of layering on the supernatural in a low fantasy way, which I think works marvelously. There's no fireballs being thrown. It has much more of an organic feel to it. The land is a power source in this game that you work with, and that comes across really, really nicely. The playbooks for these families are phenomenal. Some of the best I've ever seen. Every kind of idea is reflected in them, from, like, I'm playing the Teachers of Forgotten Lore, which are remembering the old times before the Empire. They're very mystic. They're very original peoples. We have another that you could play, which is the Church, which is the church that came in with the Empire. There are merchants, there are builders, there are the people of the sea. There, all of them with wonderful evocative writing, just really interesting. And as I said, that low fantasy element has really brought it all together. It seems realistic.
Yeah. There are a few good other RPGs that cover that mythic Russia, Rus, GURPS Russia, but it's a very narrow pool.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this actually is more playable than any of those things.
How playable is it if you don't know the history of the 1200s and you just have some standard ideas
I
about...
don't think it matters. I think
I
that,
don't
Yeah.
either.
yeah.
I mean, I know lots of folk tales, Russian folk tales and stuff like that.
I'd say honestly that what is given in like the materials will put you in the right headspace.
Yeah.
Perfect.
It really does. I don't have anything bad to say about the system, but a few things that I've struggled with a little bit is we have these arbiter projects that send you out to do things. It is, again, kind of a catalyst for action, but they can be a little vague in the best ways to accomplish them. It also is, in its way, a setup for moving to the next age. And they can get long.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's been something I wonder where that could be tinkered with to make sure you're progressing that story along maybe a little quicker.
Yeah. I mean, given the way we've played so far, maybe we finish this project next session, but that's 5 sessions, 4 if you don't count character creation. So maybe in the course of a game, maybe you could get 2 projects in,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't even think we'll necessarily get this project finished next time. But I don't
And
know.
we're not playing a short campaign.
Yeah.
We're 9 sessions, and I highly doubt we'll turn the age more than once.
Yeah. I don't know if that's a matter of the GM needing to be putting more pressure on that or forcing the players onto that. I don't know. I'm still finding my way on it, but I agree with you.
So much of it is, of the game, it has big things going on, and those can take a little time,
Mhm.
especially, I mean, we're only playing with 4 players, but at the same time, each of us have things we want to do. There's only so much time in a session, and, those projects are a little involved.
Mhm.
But I do like that there's the catalyst in the game. So another is these ritual rules. The magic of the system is done with rituals. Houses can sometimes start with rituals they've learned. It's an option they have. And then you can learn more. The little bit of a problem I'm having is there isn't a great deal of description of how these rituals work, or something I think really should be added to the game, how to make new rituals.
Mhm.
Just some page in there that tells you, kind of as examples, what makes a new ritual.
Yeah. It leaves a lot unsaid about how the rituals function, and we're still feeling our way to it. This last session, we maybe kind of got the way we're going to handle it, but
Mhm.
boy, it has taken us a while to figure that out.
And it's not exactly in rules as written.
Yeah.
It really is not quite described out. And that just feels like maybe a page that could have been in there.
Mhm.
Again, not a huge complaint because it's been unbelievably fun to play, and we found our way to getting rituals off and doing things with them. So, I mean, it's not like it's caused a problem, but it is a little vague. And finally, this is a map-making game. You place things on the map. Lowell's done a wonderful job of coming up with beautiful things. Our map is lovely, but I am hopeless at putting things on a map. It's just terrible. Lowell has been very kind to place them for me. So, for those of you who have trouble like me manipulating a map, there is that element. But it is intrinsically important to the game. That world build is so important,
Yeah.
and I love a world building game. And kind of to tail on that world building idea, this is a game that you must go ahead and plan for a session 0.
Yeah.
It is completely necessary. It is important. It is also, I think, very valuable to you because you will become immersed in that world once you put these imprints on it, and it just takes the game and puts it in the stratosphere.
And your takeaways?
Well, I'll be honest. I played regular Legacy. I played this. I think I like this better than regular Legacy.
Interesting.
Partially because I like the grounded historical element. And, that's a very me thing. I really like that. Second, I like the Arbiter being there to cause things, which is not so much so in regular Legacy.
Mm-hmm.
There is an element of floundering about in regular Legacy to find what you're going to do. I don't think that is like a bad thing altogether. It's just something that takes a little system mastery and understanding what you need to do to get the game really humming. And I think that Free from the Yoke kind of falls into that a little quicker. I'll tell you, those house playbooks may be the best I've seen in ages. They do so much to get you in there. And every one of them is fascinating. It's a game you can look at those playbooks and say, I want to play every single one of these.
Sherri, questions, comments?
How are they different than the playbooks for Legacy, for the houses? What is different? What have they done in these that make it feel more like you get what's going on?
Part of it is the setup questions for them, but honestly, it is that map. Despite it being my bane, it is so evocative. The things you put on there and the descriptions of why they're there really lock you in to those playbooks. The moves all really relate deeply into what your house is like. It informs so much of how you view the world. And with Straight Legacy, I think that I think they're very, very good, but they're very disparate. Those houses there are some that you could look at and say, right from the beginning, I don't think we're going to have this one, and this one, so you could have a more cohesive campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Every one of these in Legacy fits like a glove into what the story's going to be.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense, because that is one of the things. So do you feel like all of them have a clear approach to getting resources or getting the things that they need to power what their family does, or do they have that full range of moves?
Yeah, I feel like it. I also feel like they did a nice job of pairing your character moves into those house moves so that there are a lot of your character moves that feed the house.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And that ends up, and since you have that option, I love a 2-tiered system for what you're playing. And so house and character levels always are going to work for me. But to see them as integrated as they are into helping the house, those character moves, helping the house gain something or developing up the rituals or the resources, that sort of thing, it sings.
Cool.
So my March, like Sherri, we did our 13th Age game that we ported over to online, which has been interesting. And we did Hearts of Wulin with the Supernatural playbook. We also transitioned that from face-to-face to online. On Gauntlet, I did Hearts of Wulin. I also did Hearts of Wulin with the Courtly frame, which I'm pretty happy with. Free from the Yoke that Tyler spoke about. I also did Neo Shinobi Vendetta, though I got sick for the last session of the 5, and I felt very bad about that. But the other game that I ran is #iHunt, and that's the game that I want to talk about today. So #iHunt is monster hunting in the gig economy. You are people on the margins. You are poor, present-gen 20-somethings desperately trying to get by, and you are doing essentially the Uber of monster hunting. And this is a game by Olivia Hill and Philomena Young. It's a complete Fate game. The sort of central mechanics are very much core Fate, with just a couple of minor actual mechanical changes. But otherwise, if you know Fate, this game will be very easy. And it's actually based on a series of novels. There are some novels that they wrote that are out there that actually a couple of people I talked to have read, and one of the players went and bought them all and read them and enjoyed them. So they're out there. It's a brilliant concept. Let me just get right into what I really liked about this. It's got great world building. You have an app, and that app is impersonal and distant, and it doesn't give you much information. And you've got some stars, and there's a whole set of procedures trying to figure out what's going on when you get these jobs and you make choices between jobs. Great world building. There's the idea that there are what they call kinks, that there are different groups of people who use the iHunt app, and they use them in different ways. Like there are people that are very much focused on doing social engineering to do what they do, and people who are very much about bringing the fight to the monsters kind of thing. There's lots of cool stuff, along with this general sense that everyone laughs in the world that there's this iHunt app out there. Then they think it's mostly a joke, but when people have these encounters with these things, they actually go and use them. And there's some implications to that, because most of the time people only need to use the app once, so they can afford to rate it lower, especially if they're going to get a discount on the monster hunting job. Which brings us to the real point. Capitalism is the enemy. In this game, capitalism is the real enemy with all that implies. iHunt itself is an exploitative company, but it is the best gig in town for the money that you can get. The game has lots of discussion about that. There's some discussion about having and handling poverty as an issue and a problem for your characters without fetishizing it. Like it talks about the implications for healthcare, for living spaces, for getting by day to day. It's really solid, very solidly written. And then that plays into the iHunt app itself. After the first job, they killed this demon. And I was like, okay, what do you do with the body? They're like, it didn't like vanish or anything. No, you've got this body. And they're like, well, doesn't iHunt do something? And we're like, no, you're contractors. You have to take care of this yourself. There's no iHunt is going to clean up your crime scene for you. You've got to now figure out what you do. And they had to make a decision. They were like, well, they're probably body disposal apps, but those are probably even more hanky. And they ended up having to go and use other resources to get rid of it. And it added a dimension to the play that was very interesting, different than, say, Monster of the Week and things. So just the setup and the premise and how it plays out is dynamite, like absolutely dynamite. I really, really, really love it. The one mechanical addition they have is something called the edge die, where if someone has the edge, and usually that's the monster, they're rolling 3 fate dice plus a d6 to determine the results if they want to invoke that. And that's a huge swing in fate. Like, that's a big difference. But the players can take it by either actively taking actions to get the edge die to themselves and then using it, or if they get a success with style and defend, they can take that. And we actually saw that really help there in that final session. So it's a neat tweak. It's good. I'd seen the D6 as an element in, say, Strange Fate that Kerberos Club and Base Raiders used, but there it was very, all the time, very wonky. This is discrete. It makes a certain change. It's very cool. It is one of the most readable and fun rulebooks I've gone through in recent years. Very meta, lots of snark, lots of really interesting information. It's all handled very well. Sometimes I don't like that kind of where the voice is so overwhelming. There's parts of the very first Dresden Files RPG that kind of I found off-putting because it was so much about the world and so much snark and things like that. Here, I think it works. It doesn't create a barrier for me. In fact, it draws me in. It's very, very well written. And I think that's cool to see. What I'm less sure about, and it's just a few minor things. One of the things I want to say here is I am a person who likes Fate. I have some issues with it from time to time. I tend to run a streamlined Fate, but Fate is I can run it, and I dig it. How it gets played out in this, we've got a very interesting and evocative skill list. There's Infiltrator and Influencer and things like that. They're different skills than the standard Fate roundup. And while those are great and super evocative, they're also that way where when you hear them, you're like, what does that mean? And so it can take a while to get comfortable with what the skills that are being called on actually do in the context of it. And it's a Fate game where X skills can be used for attack, X skills can be used for defend, X skills can be used for create advantage, X skills can be used for overcome. It's very, sets those in mechanical blocks, whereas sometimes when I run, I'm a little more loose about that, but I wasn't here, and so that kind of created a little bit of tension. Sherri?
Also, sometimes words that sound like they ought to have an attack, like gorilla, as in G-U-E-R, rilla. That sounds like they would have a sneaky attack, but in fact there is no attack move for it. And I was like, what?
Yeah. It's a game, as with Fate, you always have to figure out the scale and the economy. And because this game has kind of a bigger scale than a lot of Fate games, there are a lot of different ways it can go. It's a little more work. It's sort of that trad Fate expectations. You kind of need to know Fate, be comfortable with it, I think, to work with it. I don't think that's a bad thing, but it is something you've got to be ready for, because I think I probably didn't go into a high enough gear with the players in terms of the opposition they were facing. I think I could have gone up a couple of notches on that. The other thing I'll say is a less sure about thing, and I just want to kind of talk about this tangentially, because I think it's a bigger issue than just iHunt. It's actually an issue in terms of modern horror, modern fantasy. One of the things is, with a lot of these horror stories and things like this, you're kind of doing things that are analogies for other things. And I think you have to be I realize now how careful you have to be with those. We had a situation where I'd kind of set up a thing where there was a bad guy, and the bad guy, was kind of manipulating things. Then the group was sent by this other person to go and deal with this bad guy, but it was a trap. But the way it had been set up with the kind of unpleasantness of the bad guy is when the trap was revealed, it was the person who had told them what was going on, had said, I've been suffering this way, and there's this bad guy. And it was pointed out to me that the way that text read then was that the person who was the victim was lying. And it was an implication about that I hadn't considered, because it was so close to kind of the modern and the social implications and things like that. It did have that read on it, and it was absolutely right. That game actually got me really, really thinking about how we approach. And we talked about this, a few months ago. I had the same issue a little bit when we ran Mutants in the Night, that there were some subtext and things that I just didn't have in my head, that I hadn't fully comprehended, and it required some thinking about. So that's more an issue about what I'm sure about me having to look and be more careful, which is sometimes tougher when you're just doing pure improvisational games. But I think it's worth having those. And again, it's another reason why it's so important to have safety tools, not just the X card, but lines and veils and the X card and open door and all of those things out there, because those things can get hit on.
Well, and also open conversation where you and your players are comfortable talking to each other, even if it's only afterwards that you figure that out or have the words for what's gone on.
Yeah. But my takeaway is I can't wait to see the print-on-demand version, and it's one of the best modern setups I've seen. One of my favorite Fate settings, 100%. Let's go to our second segment.
Hi, listeners. There has never been a better time to get into online role-playing games than right now, and the Gauntlet is one of the best places to give it a shot. We've been organizing and running hundreds of game sessions each year since 2015, and we're always happy to welcome new players. Today, I want to talk about two things: Gauntlet Hangouts and Gauntlet Community Open Gaming. Gauntlet Hangouts is our regular weekly game schedule where players and game runners come together to run the best indie tabletop role-playing games around. Right now, we have a limited number of $10 spots available on our Patreon. These $10 spots are the best way to get involved with Gauntlet Hangouts because they give you RSVP priority for new Gauntlet Hangouts game sessions. These $10 spots also come with the regular benefits of Gauntlet membership: the Codex magazine, access to our Slack group, and you help keep podcasts like this one going. But you need to act fast. There are only 35 of these $10 spots available for calendar year 2020. The other thing I want to talk about is Gauntlet Community Open Gaming. Gauntlet Community Open Gaming is a special weekend of gaming we have put together to help support folks who are trapped in the house because of coronavirus. The first Gauntlet Community Open Gaming weekend is April 16th through April 19th. This special event is completely free. Anyone can join up and play, and features an amazing lineup of games from Hearts of Wulin to Trophy to Pasión de las Pasiones and much more. To learn more about Gauntlet Hangouts and Gauntlet Community Open Gaming, head over to our website, gauntlet-rpg.com. Thanks.
Listeners, in our second segment, we have our guest, in this case, Tyler, who can discuss a project they're working on, a thing they're excited about, game requests, any of that kind of thing. Tyler, what is the topic you'd like to chat about today?
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of game theory thing here because I'm discussing crunch in games. As you might have heard from what I've played this month, I'm playing games with a pretty broad scope of crunch, though some probably altogether on the higher end. And crunch is where the mechanics have a lot of moving parts, where there tends to be a lot of roles, a lot of skills, a lot of very complicated pieces and things to go into it. Like I say, I've been playing Starfinder, I've played the Free from the Yoke, I played Ars Magica Scion. There is crunch that I think is really helpful for a game, and I'm going to use as an example Ars Magica. No doubt it is a very crunchy game. It is the sort of game you make a spreadsheet for so that you can keep up with all of your various types of rolls. You're putting multiple numbers together to come up with your formula, all of these sorts of things. But I'm going to say that this is good crunch. And the reason I say that is because in Ars Magica, you're playing a mage. And this is an old style, lives in a group of mages hidden away, trying to avoid too much contact with the real world. And in this game, the thing you want to do is avoid adventuring. You want to go and study, study, study. You want to learn new things so you can be the best mage you are. And all of these formulas, all of these little, neatly little pieces and parts to learning spells, learning your arts, learning your techniques, adds to the excitement and the build of that character. You go into a Dungeons and Dragons game, you're going to be rolling a bunch for skills and fighting a monster and that sort of thing. Not so much in this game. Instead, that crunch, that need to roll, all is coming from you learning or building something or developing a new spell. And I think that that mechanic, that need for, honestly, an almost scientific approach, really brings reality to what is, truly fantastic, which is being a mage in the 1200s in Europe. On the other hand, I've been playing Starfinder, which, all of this I will say, is not necessarily anyone else's opinion, it's just mine. The following is not the official position of anyone but me. But Starfinder, I think, has what I call bad crunch, because it is taking an already pretty complicated system, Pathfinder, and it's taking it more complicated. It is added on 2 types of armor class for kinetic and energy. It's taken skills and specialized those up. It's taken feats, but then you also have things that are coming out of your playbook, and you also have things that are coming out of a template. It is bringing more and more in. It has 4 or 5 pages of just basic weapons. All of them very similar, except just maybe an energy type. That sort of thing. And for me, this added layer didn't really add to the feel of the game. Sure, a lot of folks can really enjoy saying my pistol is electricity rather than fire. But I don't know if we needed every single pistol to have the options of electricity, fire, acid, that all of these end up being something that probably could have been handled with just a tag. This seems to me to instead be detracting from what the game wants. And again, already the Pathfinder Starfinder system is probably got a lot going on anyway. So did we really need to add a bit more? Scion, 2nd edition, I think is a mixture of the two. They went out and, if anyone ever played original Scion, it is a White Wolf game, now Onyx Path. It was a huge game. I mean, you were playing gods. You got dice pools that became monstrously huge. Perhaps not full Shadowrun, but pretty darn big. And it felt like you could do godly things. They came in with Scion 2nd edition, and they tried to bring in some elements of story gaming. They opened up a lot of ideas of negotiation between GM and player on what a move would do, what characteristics plus skill you're going to be using to address each thing. They took out some of the things, I think, interestingly, like investigator perception. There isn't anything, a skill like that. Instead, they ask you, what are you using to, what informs your investigation? What informs your ability to go find out things? Which is kind of nice, and they're bowing to the idea that this should be a more cooperative concept. But they also ended up bringing in a lot of little fiddly specializations and little rules that are not very well put together in their book. It's hard to find everything. It's kind of hidden from you. And it's one of those games that 6 sessions down the road you go, oh, we've been doing this wrong all along. And that's always a little frustrating. They did, I know, have some problems during production that ended up being, yes, it ended up being quite a thing. I'll understand that may have something to do with it. But as a middle ground between the two, they did try to streamline some things and at least make it where there was more of a give and take between GM and player. But at the same time, a lot of rules in there that are not easily referenced. And that is, I think, a death knell for a game that's going to be complex. If you can't tell me what my fiddly rules are in some coherent and easily accessible fashion, you shouldn't have them.
And to put a pin in what Tyler just said, the issue is that on top of the complicated rules, the final printed edition is massively full of errata because they didn't publish the final edited version.
They did not.
They published the step apparently before that, the uncorrected version.
Yeah, a problem of file transfer to a printer, if I understand correctly, which, that's a real shame.
Yeah.
And all of us have a book that's not quite right. To wrap it all up, I'll come back just a second to Free from the Yoke, which is a PBTA game, but I think has crunch. There's a lot to it. And it is something that I think a lot of people, especially here in the Gauntlet, are very fond of PBTA and will sometimes say, oh, I just don't like the crunch. Free from the Yoke is a fairly crunchy PBTA game, and it adds to what it is as a game. It is something that builds up the experience, and I think in the end, that's what crunch is there for. If the crunch is adding and making you more immersed in the world, then that's a good crunch. If it's out there and it's making you waste time looking through a book, if it's kind of becoming more math than it is role-playing, if it's in there and maybe it could just be cut, then that's probably bad crunch. I myself prefer something with some meat to it, so I'm probably on the heavier crunch side. But in the end, I think nearly every game can benefit from having rules that bring you in, and people shouldn't be afraid when they see a game that does have a little crunch, because sometimes they really will add to your experience.
I like that you're not describing games as crunchy, but you're talking about there being crunch and being levels of crunch in these things.
Mm-hmm.
Sherri, comments before I go on my rant?
Oh, yeah. I would say that there's a kind of crunch that I like, which I think does tie into what Tyler is saying, which is I like crunch that is like for the player, in defining their character, in creating their character or advancing their character, where it is just the player's deal to go through that. Okay? Mm-hmm. Or if they don't want to, they can work with someone else to have it done. That's like 13th Age. Every one of the character types is asymmetric with the others. They have different systems that they're working through, different sets of kinds of capabilities and things that they're watching for to happen in the game. But that's all player-facing. They choose that character type, and then they're responsible for that crunch. But what's actually hitting the table is what the GM is running is, here are the obstacles, and then they are using their crunch to face those obstacles in the way that they want. That is satisfying crunch. Mm-hmm. What is unsatisfying crunch is, oh, I need to do this thing. Oh, well, you can't do that until you've done this thing. Oh, now I have to go over here and look these things up. And then the worst crunch is when you have a skill, and then they go, oh, and there are all these specialties that you can buy, and all these other things that you can buy that will make you better, and you go to read them, and in fact, no, they're not making it better. They're saying that the original skill or whatever that you had doesn't do the things that you think it is, and you have to buy these specialties to be able to track if you've bought the skill Scout. Oh, I can't track until I've bought track, but I bought Scout. I'm a Scout. I'm a 10th level Scout. How could I not track until I buy just any bizarre stuff? So you see a lot of that. Like sometimes they just do things to add more splat books, and that's the crunch I loathe.
For me, things that modularize that. I mean, because when you really look at it, a PBTA playbook has a lot of rules and has a lot of mechanics, but you don't need to look at that much. You make your player choices and you decide which moves you're going to have, and those are the ones you have to deal with. And then we get the basic moves. But I will say this, as a GM, and other people may agree, I have no freaking clue what any of the characters can do in 13th Age. I have no idea what your feats are. I have no idea what your limits are. You know the rules. I'm just running from my side. I don't have to know, and I never will know. The same thing goes actually with PBTA. A lot of the times, I just get to play, and then I'm delighted to find out what the player moves do. Oh, you can do that? That's great. Let's go.
Yep.
Yeah,
I like that.
I dislike it when we get things like there's a lot I like about the 2D20 system from Modiphius, but there's so much of it that is over orchestrated, and things that you could be done with a single roll require multiple rolls and have different kinds of types for things and multiple economies, and it just feels like it doesn't need to have that. And it's also written, everything is written in the third person. And so your character can, it's not even your character, the character can do this task. And every time they're talking about the thing you're trying to do, it repeats the word this task when you could just cut it down. And that's a thing where that game has a lot more crunch that is global, that both the players and the GM have to engage with about how you actually resolve processes. But I'm interested that you said Ars Magica has crunch that you think is good, because there's a lot to it.
It is a very involved game, but I think it's all there for the betterment of the game. And again, I will say, I tend towards the crunchier end, and some people want something as complicated as, say, Champions. Some people want something as lower end of complications as, I don't know, Maze Rats or World of Dungeons. But find that comfort level for yourself, and however you enjoy a game, whatever you're looking for a game, that's good gaming.
Yeah, the paradigm of analyzing the crunch rather than just blanket saying something is crunchy, I think that's a really good viewpoint you have there.
Thank you.
Well, let's move to our final segment. Listeners, in our final segment, each of us is going to discuss something that is lately inspiring us or giving us joy in a segment we call Giving Me Life. Sherri!
Yes.
What is giving you life?
Well, this week, it's that I found a decent buttercream frosting recipe, because I come from a strange situation where my family believes that cake should have frosting, but my husband just wants cake, no frosting. I finally found...
It's frippery. It's unnecessary frippery.
So I finally found a frosting that was not too sweet, not too cloying, not too heavy, but that everyone could agree was frosting and that everyone was happy with. Yay, buttercream frosting. With a little bit of milk added to it at the end. Perfect. It was the bomb.
It was good.
Oh, and nice. I added a drop of almond to sort of ping the flavor up, so it had a little bit of aromatic brightness to it, but you didn't taste almond.
No, it was good.
It came out great. Everyone was happy. Unprecedented.
Sounds delicious.
It was good.
Tyler, what is giving you life?
Well, I'll tell you, it's Star Trek Picard.
Ooh.
Patrick and I just binged it. It's unfortunately on CBS All Access, which I'll tell you is a ripoff. So thank you, 2 free months of access. I highly recommend everyone take advantage of that and binge the heck out of it in Discovery. But it is, and I'm not going to give any spoilers, but it is a darker look at Star Trek. But at the same time, it brings in some real hopefulness. And I'll tell you, the writing is spectacular. Every character, and we get to see some characters from the past popping in there. All of them well written. I'll tell you, Deanna Troi is best written I've ever seen that character in this series. Just really well done on that character. It is beautiful to look at, and the story was really moving. By the end, I was totally invested in it, and of course, Patrick Stewart is a treasure. The rest of that ensemble cast, Amanda Heard's in it, the captain of the ship that they have plays multiple characters and does them all spectacularly. It is truly a wonderful series.
Excellent. And of course, listeners, you may have heard us talk about Once More Into the Void, which is Jamila Najati's homage to that and quite buys into that atmosphere. I'm glad you're here. I'm going to finally break down and binge it now that you give me the recommendation there.
Oh, you definitely should. And buy it free.
Yes. So my pick is, I picked up Disgaea 5. Disgaea 5 is an SRPG, a Japanese strategy RPG. It is over the top. It is made for post-game content. It is about getting bigger and bigger numbers. and it is about repeatedly doing these fights, and it is mindless, and that is exactly what I've needed. Is I go and I sit there and I run rote on these battles over and over again, trying to get bigger and bigger numbers. And I will tell you, I didn't know I needed that. It's goofy and dumb and bright and sunny, and I'm very glad that I have it to occupy my mind. So I dig it very much.
This is a good time for that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Listeners, that's our show. If you need to contact us, you can contact us at Gauntlet RPG on Twitter. We also have forums at forums.gauntlet-rpg.com. Of course, we have a number of podcasts besides the Gauntlet podcast, including Plus One Forward, our PBTA podcast, and Fear of a Black Dragon, our old school podcast. You can find out about those at gauntlet-rpg.com. Of course, our Patreon supports these podcasts and the community as a whole. That's at patreon.com/gauntlet. Supporting at different levels of the Patreon can get you access to Codex, which is our magazine, RSVP priority access to our community gaming calendar, and also access to our Slack. Also, this is a great opportunity if you're listening to a lot of podcasts right now to rate and review those to boost those podcasts that have been getting you through these trying times. Tyler, thank you for joining us.
Oh, I had a wonderful time. Thank you all so much.
And Sherri, thank you once again.
Thank you.
And listeners, that is our show.